So hey anime fans, the series name is What If Naruto Got Harem with Game of Thrones. So let's start the series. A kunai was gripped tightly in his hand, gently tearing his skin beneath its rough wrapping. As he dashed across melting snow and leaped over shrubs, winter breath fanned around Naruto's face. The wind blew straight through his bones, making him even colder. "Where did that crow go?" he bit out under his breath. The blonde leaped over a fallen branch and swiftly looked left, right, up, and behind in the forest. His legs were beginning to fail him as he reached a clearing, and his feet scraped the ground, causing him to stop. Naruto didn't waste any time in running for the small town, knowing that the crow must be behind its stone walls and towers. He furrowed his brow as soon as the blonde skidded into the town. Something about it caused him to halt his run and proceed through it slowly while paying close attention to his surroundings. It was odd, despite the numerous stores and tools strewn about, there were no people in the area, and everything was quiet except for the sound of the air. He heard it then, a crow's caw. The winged creature was perched defensively on a large wolf statue when Naruto turned his head toward the sound. His fingers automatically held the weapon in his hand as he approached the bird, and when he was close enough to attack, he swung out, until he noticed a boy standing across from him, facing the bird in the opposite direction. The crow escaped from the statue and flew into a stone tunnel after both boys gasped and leaped back. Naruto's stunned eyes followed the crow and returned to the young boy in front of him, who appeared equally perplexed as he did. "Kid, what are you doing here?" was the first thing Naruto said. When the youngster didn't answer, he followed up with, "Were you chasing that crow, too?" The brown-headed child nodded this time, but remained silent. Naruto scratched his blonde hair and attempted to think about the situation. He was certain that Itachi had put the crow down his throat, but what was this youngster involved in? The child then said quietly, "I live here," swallowing the lump in his throat. "I live here, that's why I'm here. What are you doing here?" the young man asked, raising his voice. "This is kinda weird, but I think that crow belongs to me. I've been chasing it for a while and it led me here," Naruto said, glancing away from the child as he saw the bow and arrow in his hand and wondering why he was the only one in the hamlet. The child looked incredulously before slowly nodding. He pursed his lips and looked toward the tunnel into which the crow had flown. Naruto followed the boy's gaze into the tunnel and asked, "What's your name, kid?" In response, the boy said, Brandon Stark, "What's yours?" to the tunnel rather than Naruto. Bran received a silent response, and when he turned to face the tall blonde again, no one was there. He looked around bewildered, then noticed something shiny in the dirt. He walked over to it, stooped, and picked it up with his free hand. It was a strange weapon, but intriguing all at once. It simply appeared to be a peculiar dagger. And everything turned white. "You're right, that does sound very unusual." "I know, Kakashi-sensei, it's weird enough that I remembered a dream in the first place." Kakashi watched absently as Naruto plucked at some decaying wood that had fallen off the log he was seated on. They had been camping out on a mission when Naruto had that strange dream. He woke up disoriented and stumbled to Kakashi, tripping on his unkempt sleeping mat. The older ninja, who had been on watch duty, could tell that his former student was very disturbed and asked him right away what was wrong. Naruto just stared at him before telling him the details of his dream, all of which were so fresh and vivid in his mind that he couldn't believe it was a dream. Kakashi listened intently, noting that the blonde was perspiring a lot beneath his clothes, which usually required a great deal of effort. After Naruto finished, it took Kakashi a long time to think about it. To the former instructor, this felt more like a dream, more like a vision of some kind. Kakashi wasn't one to explore the deeper magic, but when Naruto called it a dream, something didn't feel right. As Naruto busied himself with the rotting foliage, the silver-haired jounin massaged his chin with 2 fingers. "So it stopped right after you heard the boy's name," he asked. Yeah, when he asked me what mine was, it felt like I was physically getting sucked out of the dream, like something was pulling me out. That's when I woke up. The weirdest part is that I feel so freaking tired. I'm never this tired, the blonde said, nodding in response as she flicked a piece of wood off the log. Kakashi glanced into Naruto's eyes and saw a look of pure confusion. Normally, the blonde didn't care about such things as dreams. Instead, the boy concentrated on the here and now and what was happening in real life. The fact that this dream was affecting him so much, apparently both mentally and physically, indicated that it wasn't as straightforward as it seemed. What was the boy's name again? The masked man questioned, clicking his tongue and obliquely equating this to an interrogation. Without skipping a beat, the blonde said, Brandon Stark. The senior shinobi was once more perplexed by this. The name sounded completely different from anyone else's in the village, and even though Kakashi was a rather cultured man, he couldn't recall hearing that name anywhere else in any other city, nation, or. His eye skill may allow him to jump between dimensions, and if this Brandon Stark child wasn't in theirs, Kakashi's eyes widened a little as he realized what this dream might mean. It also couldn't have been a coincidence that Naruto was with the one person who could help him. The older ninja couldn't help but doubt the entire scenario because it sounded so unbelievable and improbable. If Naruto were to dimension hop, it could spell terrible things on both ends. There were too many complications and too many things that could go wrong, and what if Naruto didn't make it to the alternate universe, let alone the journey there? Kakashi was at his emotional limit and couldn't afford to be held accountable for the death of yet another teammate. If he was going to carry out this plan, he had to make sure of one thing. Naruto, what do you make of this dream that you had? The young man simply gazed at his former instructor. Huh? Kakashi shifted his query to, what are you feeling right now? Do you feel like you just had a nightmare, or is it something else? As he looked up at the dawn rising up the night sky. I feel something in the pit of my stomach. I don't know how to explain it, but I just feel like he needs my help, and he needs it now. Why'd you ask that? Naruto said, staring at his clenched hands and thinking until his head started to pound. After giving Naruto a quick glance, Kakashi said, have you ever heard his name before? At all? As the youngster got up from the log, Kakashi's eyes followed him. No, it sounded crazy foreign. He's obviously not from Fire Country, that's for sure, the boy said. I haven't heard his name anywhere for miles, Naruto. I don't think he's from our world, much less Fire Country. I think you've stayed up a little too long, Kakashi-sensei, Naruto said with a tentative laugh in his throat. Naruto, listen to me. This dream of yours didn't happen just because. It's definitely a long shot, but I think you actually had a vision, and not just any vision. It seems that this boy you met was from an entirely different world, a world that needs help, the silver-haired man said, coming to his feet almost reluctantly. There's only one world, and that's the one we're in. What do you mean by different worlds? The young guy said, turning back and staring at him incredulously. The reason I know there are different worlds, or rather, different dimensions, is that my eye can send objects to them, Kakashi said with a little sigh. Naruto had heard of this before, but he had never witnessed Kakashi do it. He assumed that his former teacher had just obliterated them from the world rather than transporting them to another realm. As he considered Kakashi's remarks, his expression started to shift. The Jonin kept giving the blonde information. The Forbidden Dimension Jutsu allows me to send objects from kunai to people to alternate universes. If this vision you saw happened to be in another world, there was no coincidence I was here with you. The only other person that can achieve this technique is the one that gave you that crow in the first place. So, you'll take me there, right? The blonde asked, furrowing his brow. With another long sigh, Kakashi said, I don't know, Naruto. Even though the entire situation was completely nonsensical, Naruto somehow felt that this was the correct thing to do. He knew deep down that he should be there, wherever that boy was, but he wasn't really sure why. Nevertheless, there was no doubting that he should at least go there. Naturally, Naruto initially felt uneasy and strange about the situation. He reasoned that it was due to anxiety. When I grew up, despite what everyone said about me, I had a feeling that I was destined to do something big, I don't know what, but something that would change everything. Maybe this is it. Maybe what I was destined to do was help save this other world from chaos, he said, mustering the courage to try to persuade the copy ninja to allow him to enter the world of his dreams. I know it's a long shot, I know there's a big chance that it's all a mistake, and I know that there's a bigger chance that I won't make it back, but I have to do this, he said. The Jounin sagged and began, okay. I'll help you, but I should probably tell you about some things first, putting his hands in his pockets. He saw Naruto nod in return, but he paused before continuing. First, this jutsu was a forbidden jutsu for a reason. I can send you to another dimension, but I can't send you back here unless you remember my name, he said. The question, but how can I possibly forget you, caused Naruto to furrow his brow. Sighed, well, when you get sent to another dimension, you won't remember where you came from. This includes your name, people you knew, your past, and whatever life you had back home. The hardest part is that you'll have to remember the transfer's name in order to come back. What I advise you to do is hold something that will make you remember something from here. It's only fitting, I guess, Naruto said, taking a few long breaths before steeling himself and removing his headband from his head. He had no idea what this jutsu meant, and now he didn't seem as certain about leaving. The Jounin sighed and continued, now, this is the difficult part. You'll have to concentrate on where you want to go. It's true that I can send people to other dimensions, but no one has ever even thought about where exactly they want to go. No one knows that they have control over where they are sent, since the only thing on their mind is fear. Since their mind is blank, they get sent to the default dimension, the one that I created myself. I'll need you to concentrate on breaking that fear and focusing on where you want to go, you understand me? Naruto's legs feel like jello all of a sudden. How was he expected to handle this? Naruto, you can do this. Focus on the setting of your dream and recreate it as much as you can in your head, Kakashi said quickly after noticing the boy's uncertainty beginning to appear on his face. The young shinobi closed his eyes and focused. He knew it would be challenging, but he had endured too much to be defeated by this jutsu. I'm ready, he said, opening his eyes and biting out. The teacher asked, what do you want me to tell everyone, as Kakashi nodded and moved away from him by a few meters. After a moment of hesitation, Naruto said, just tell them that I'll be back soon. Bran's gaze soared upward, revealing his wooden ceiling. Even though the sweat drops were a clear indication that he was overheated, the blankets were insufficient to stop the chill he felt in his bones. He could feel his brown hair stuck to his cheeks and neck, and his skin felt sticky everywhere. Why was he standing on two legs in his strange dream from last night? For what purpose was that crow there? Why did the boy in his dream have Lannister-like eyes and hair? Why the hell is he so clean? I bet he's a spy from the south. Kill him before he wakes up. Settle down, both of you, look at him, he's just a boy. Osha, dear, you're getting soft. How would you like it if you woke up with a knife at your throat? As they surrounded a boy who was resting down in the mossy wolfswood, three wildlings continued to quarrel. They encountered a startling scene while traveling through the thick forest, a boy lying down in undamaged clothing, wearing fading orange leggings and a matching old orange tunic, with a long-sleeved, ruffled black blouse underneath. He looked so out of place that it was almost eerie. No one in the north had hair as blonde as his. They cautiously approached him and discovered that he was unconscious. They debated whether or not to kill him, but Wallen and Stiv were in favor of it. At that point, Wallen pulled a dagger out of his belt and touched the boy's neck. The youngster paused when his eyes suddenly opened and he saw the three of them towering over him. The wildlings also froze in response to his intense blue eyes, which were White Walker eye blue. The boy swallowed and grimaced as the dagger nicked his pale skin. "I wouldn't move a bit if I were you," Wallen said with a laugh. Stiv chuckled. "I think you can let him go, Wallen, he isn't worth the kill." As the poor youngster continued to gaze, Osha simply rolled her eyes. "What's your name, boy?" she whispered, bending down to his eye level. Honestly, it looked like he'd seen a ghost or something. The blonde scowled and darted his gaze in her direction. His intense and grating silence left the three of them perplexed until he spoke. I don't know." Turning back to the lad, the woman bit out, "Stop your joking, some people forget their name, but no one just doesn't know it, out with it." After asking in denial, "What?" and discovering that Stiv and Wallen were equally as ignorant as she was. "I'm gonna ask you one more time, and I'm gonna get an honest answer, you hear me?" Osha turned back to the child and furrowed her brow. The blonde minutely shook his head in response, being cautious not to let the dagger pierce his skin. Osha took the dagger from Wallen's hand and pushed it away from the boy's body, giving the man a sardonic look. "I'm telling you the truth, woman, I swear, I don't know my name," the boy said after just nodding. "He's got spy written all over him," sneered Stiv. After examining his face for any indications of dishonesty, Osha came to the sad conclusion that the child had no idea what his name was. With no dirt on him, what in the world was he doing in the Wolfswood? It wasn't only the child's appearance that made her uneasy, there was something unusual about him that she couldn't quite place. It was only a gut feeling, though. "You're lucky I believe you, boy, if you were some kind of spy," she said. "Osha, he's got something in his hand." Osha glanced at Wallen and then followed his gaze to the bundle in the boy's clenched fingers. The boy then looked at his own hand and raised his head while holding his fist to his face. A thin cloth slipped out of his hand, and the four individuals examining it saw the metal fragment on it gleam in the sunlight. A mysterious symbol was located in the middle of the metal plate. Osha watched the youngster's face as he gazed in amazement at the cloth in his palm. She was unsure of his exact thoughts, but she was certain that he was unaware of the origin of the thin band. The woman began to question whether the boy was suffering from amnesia. "You're a spy, aren't you?" Wallen sneered in the boy's face as he grasped his shirt collar. "I'm not a spy." "I don't even know how I got here," the youngster cried loudly as his eyes widened and he shook his head. "You're just a lying little shit," the man said before throwing him into a patch of mud. The boy grunted and fell hard, his clothes now covered in mud. He pushed himself up with his hands until Stiv kicked him in the side. The blond boy coughed and held the swelling in his free hand. Wallen used this opportunity to take the band from his hand. Hey! Give that back!" The boy groaned and rolled onto his back as Wallen peered down at him and kicked him again in the stomach. Wallen stepped toward him, towered over him, and waved the naval fabric before saying, "This is worth more than you, boy, now leave before I kill you this time," before whispering, "Give it back." "You bastard," the boy spat forth blood. Then, quietly behind Wallen's back, the woman remarked, "Wallen, I think he's had enough." "You're gonna kill him." Osha rolled her eyes as the blow made contact. Before it appeared that the boy had just enough energy left for one more blow, he heard a rustling in the distance. Wallen stopped, looked around, and slowly picked up the piece of cloth he had dropped prior to the beating. He then got up and ran toward the sound, hiding in the thickets. The boy struggled to move his arms and lay motionless in the mud puddle, with what felt like a bloody nose, a black eye, and a battered stomach. The child tried to figure out how he got into that situation in the first place, and he was certain that he had at least 2 broken ribs, but when he placed his hand on his stomach, it felt fine. He rubbed the surface of his belly and felt nothing unusual, which may have hurt his ego a little. His arm felt good enough to bend, so he reached up and felt his face, expecting a swollen eye, but he felt that the eyes were perfectly fine, and he also noticed that his nose had stopped bleeding entirely. The youngster scraped some mud off his cheeks and pulled up on his elbows. His hair felt as sticky as the rest of his body, but at least he didn't have any serious aches. It was odd that he recovered so quickly from such a thrashing. The man must have struck him roughly 10 times in 4 separate locations, but he didn't mind because it was preferable than dying in a mud pit. After he got to his feet, the blonde soon discovered that attempting to remove mud from clothing was ineffective when your hands were equally muddy. Something in his stomach was aching for that navy cloth. He looked around, thinking about finding the 3 people who had left him a moment ago. There were no signs of them, but he somehow knew exactly which way they had gone. It was as if his sense of smell was enhanced, and they had a distinct scent, crisp, like the cold. He followed his instincts, assuming, and headed in that direction. After a minute, he managed to capture them. They were in a small clearing with what looked to be a little boy riding a horse. The youngster decided to hide in the bushes and wait for a favorable opportunity. "That's a pretty pin." "Silver," the woman said in a voice he heard. "We'll take the pin, and the horse, get down," the other man added. When he noticed his piece of cloth hanging out of the man's pocket, the blond lad wrinkled his hand. He waited. "Be quick about it," the child simply said. "I can't," the saddle, the straps, with trepidation. A device that held the child's legs to the saddle was exposed as the other man present whipped the boy's clothes off. The blond youngster, who was hiding in the bushes, frowned his brow. "What's wrong with you? You some kind of cripple?" "I'm Brandon Stark of Winterfell, and if you don't let me be, I'll have you all killed," the child screamed suddenly. "The boy's worth nothing dead," the woman interrupted. The boy had just been battered to death in the bushes a few minutes before, so why was he valuable? Was the horse-riding boy unique? Or did he actually have no value at all? The boy's mind was racing with so many questions that he missed a significant amount of the discourse because everything was unclear and nothing helped him understand anything. He was about to jump out of the ferns when he heard a manly voice cut through the air, "Drop the knife." A man standing a few meters away from the group was seen removing his sword, and as he did so, he swore, "Let him go, and I'll let you live." One of the men whispered, "There ain't no White Walkers down in Dorne," and the hidden boy glanced at what he was holding and saw that it was the same dagger he had threatened him with. One of the men ran to the swordsman and started a fight, which ended quickly when the man's neck was sliced clean. As he dropped, a dagger slipped from his belt and slid in front of the blonde, who quickly grabbed it up. This time, the woman ran up to the man and joined the fight, but the boy was focused on the other guy stealing the child off the horse, so he moved through the ferns to the man holding the child. The young child cried out, "Rob," as the man fighting was about to cut her down. The blonde stopped and looked up to see the big man holding the child at knife point. "Rob," the boy said, frantically. The old man responded, "Shut up," and then, glancing at the man, or Rob, as the youngster called him, he screamed, "Drop the blade." Despite the child's warnings, the man persisted. With a desperate expression on his face, he gently dropped the blade to the ground and stood up, his face twisted in rage. When the blonde saw this as his opportunity, he leaped out of the bushes behind the man and yelled, "Let him go." He sank the dagger into the man's back just as he felt a sharp pain in his own back. He looked down and saw an arrowhead protruding from his chest, and as he sank to his knees, he saw white dots in his vision. In front of him on the ground, he saw the navy band swimming, and he painstakingly grabbed it before he fell on his side. Bran watched in disbelief as he saw the blonde child. His eyes widened as he realized he had seen him in a previous dream. Did the boy recognize him as well? Was he trying to find him? The youngster coughed blood out of his mouth, confirming Bran's suspicions that he was still alive despite the arrow point striking dangerously close to his heart. Theon hurried to the group in the distance, bow and arrow ready. Then, as he took him up, Brandon heard Rob inquire, "Are you all right?" He said immediately, "Yes, it doesn't hurt, but don't worry about me. Look, that boy's still alive." Rob was going to order Theon to carry him back when he turned to face the child who had Theon's arrow lodged in him and noticed that he was breathing heavily when Theon interrupted, saying, "Tough little lad, in the Iron Islands, you're not a man until you've killed your first enemy." "Well done." As they gazed at Theon in awe, Rob spat out, "Have you lost your mind? You shot the boy that saved Bran's life," as he put Bran down. "I mistook him for a wildling. He could have killed you and cut Bran's throat. You don't have the right," he spat out, approaching the blond boy on the ground. "To what? To save your brother's life? It was the only thing to do, so I did it." As Rob saw the child's face contort in agony, he slid his arm beneath him and raised him to a sitting posture. The lad raised his hand in his arms, grasped the front of the arrow, and attempted to draw it. Bran yelled, "Don't," as Rob took the blond boy's hand. "Stop, boy. Are you mad? You can't pull it out." "Then you do it," the boy murmured, looking up at him and breathing raggedly. "If I do, you'll die, you understand me?" Rob asked, staring at him and determining that the youngster was truly angry. "I won't, just trust me," the youngster gasped in response, as Bran watched in dread. After glancing at Theon and Bran, who were both shaking their heads, the Stark Lord sat the blonde up and knelt down behind him, holding the arrow. Bran screamed, "Stop! Do it," the boy yelled. Bran shouted again, "Get him help! He's going to die," as Rob tightened his hold on the arrow and pulled it from the boy's body, causing the blonde to gasp in agony before collapsing back into Rob's arms. The four of them knew that the youngster would die if he didn't receive medical assistance, but the woman who survived the struggle remained silent. Theon turned to Rob, who was staring at his younger brother in terror. They were short on time, the boy's death was imminent. A boy was flung into the air by a gust of wind that ripped him out of his sleep. He threw his arms in front of his head as he saw the ground rush up to meet him, but all of a sudden he was on stable ground. A wide expanse of grass surrounded him in all directions, with tall roots swaying like ocean waves. The boy panicked and twisted his entire body left and right in an attempt to find a way out of the field. He decided on one direction and lifted his foot to begin running, but it felt like he was being held back in chains. It was difficult to lift a leg to run, it felt like he was stuck in a pool of molasses. His legs were free of fatigue, and he was now running at unnatural speeds, the grass parting like waves on both sides of him and merging into green walls. He was suddenly in a forest clearing, and everything was silent save for the trees. The wind blew through the treetops, releasing leaves from their branches, and the little leaves glowed a lovely shade of green in the sunlight. The leaves encircled the boy and rose high above him in a spiraling pillar. The boy was captivated and reached out to grasp one of the green slivers. Then the ground began to give way beneath the boy and twist with the tornado into a dark hole. The pillar closed in on the boy who had no way out, and as he sank into the dark whirlpool, he roared to the heavens in a beastly manner. However, the moment he touched one, the entire pillar changed from a calm swirl to a tornado of leaves, the green leaves now bleeding red. Then there was silence. With the exception of little water droplets, the boy was lying in water that was only an inch deep, and when he opened his eyes, he could only see a stone ceiling. He sat up and saw a huge prison cell. The water soaked through his clothes and chilled his skin, and as he took it all in, he was only able to breathe erratically. The entire scene was both unsettling and reassuring. He thought he had been there before for some reason. He moved gently in the direction of the bars, disturbing the water and making little splashes. "So, this is what happened to you, huh?" "How pathetic," a loud voice said, rattling him as he approached through the metal columns. As the powerful fox lay on his paws, Naruto, or the new Naruto, sprung back and cocked his head back to gaze up at Kurama. The youngster yelled, "Why, you can talk," with a perplexed expression. The Nine-Tails was already having a hard time with the child's behavior. He nearly moaned as he said, "Shut up, kid, you're even more annoying than you were before." "What are you talking about?" the child said, his face now plastered with a puzzled expression, unaware of his predicament. "Am I dead?" he asked, his expression changing to one of curiosity. "You're not who you think you are, boy, far from it," the fox said with a laugh of amusement from within the cell. With his head lowered, the youngster answered, "But I don't even know who I am now." The fox looked down at him thoughtfully, thinking something. It didn't sit right with him to see his host change completely. This child obviously lacked Naruto's fire and, most importantly, his guts. He embodied everything that was gone. Looking back, the way that Jerk had beaten the boy until he was nearly dead was enough to make the fox scratch at his insides. At that point, he decided that Naruto's contact with him was crucial. Kurama recalled that since Naruto only had bruises and broken bones, the only thing he could do was use his chakra to heal him. Fortunately, he had done so before Naruto was speared, otherwise, the boy would have undoubtedly died. As it goes, things were different in this world. Although Kurama had heard about the forbidden dimension jutsu, it was morbidly fascinating to watch someone fall victim to its effects. It was as if the person had been reborn, but without reincarnation. Throughout the years that he had heard about people using the jutsu, the stories were always told by others. Why? Since the individuals who departed never returned, he now understands why. If they had been transported to the user's default dimension, they were probably imprisoned there until they died. However, if they had been transported to other dimensions, they would not have been able to recall who they were, much less the identity of the person who sent them there. In addition, the majority of people were banished to other dimensions rather than sent. The fox's mind was now being pulled by the sight of the most vibrant ninja he had ever encountered suffer from this heinous jutsu. He acknowledged that it was funny to watch something actually defeat Naruto, but he acknowledged that he had witnessed this boy overcome everything up to this point. In fact, he had even managed to get Kurama to warm up to him, something that no one does or even wants to do, but he did, and the fox respected him for it. It would have to be slow, but he was going to gradually remind Naruto of who he was. Kurama didn't want to take the chance of slamming everything at once because he didn't know what it would do to him at the moment. Kurama accompanied Naruto to this new planet not by accident, he was there to assist him in returning home. Even more so, it was a miracle the boy got to him. When he first fell unconscious, Kurama was worried he wouldn't make it. He realized he wouldn't have enough time when the arrow struck Naruto's back. Naruto may have forgotten who he was, but the fox inside him didn't forget anything. The language barrier alone would have been a nightmare for Naruto if he hadn't had Kurama inside of him. Fortunately, the Nine-Tails knew a wide variety of languages and knew right once which one he needed to teach his host. "So, you know who I am?" Naruto said abruptly as he glanced down at his shoes soaked in water. Hissed Kurama, "I know you're not the pathetic slouch you're being now. Pick your head up, boy, the real you would knock you senseless if he were here now." The youngster yelled out, "The real me? I'm me. I am dreaming, right? This is some kind of joke," as he looked up with teary eyes. "The only joke here is you, kid, unbelievable." Kurama was not giving up just yet, and he could hear the young child yelling, "Believe it," as he began to turn heel and leave. In his head, which prompted him to snarl softly. Kurama's loud voice, "This is no dream, boy, you can't leave unless I kick you out," overpowered the splashes Naruto was creating with his footsteps. Yeah, sure. I'm sure you'll be able to kick me out once you get through those bars, yeah? I wouldn't leave if I were you, he said softly as a tiny growl tore from the fox's fangs. Why? And the boy asked, turning around and squinting his eyes. When the boy gave up and left again, the Ninetails used his trump card to say, I wouldn't leave the only one who knows my name just yet, before responding. The fox looked down at him, red eyes buried deep into blue as the two engaged in their own staring contest. This is good, the fox thought, fight me, grow a pair, and face me. The youngster froze in place, and there was just silence. Rob, is he going to be all right? I don't know, but the doctors are doing what they can, said the oldest Stark male across Bran's bed, giving his younger brother a gloomy look. He saved me, and Theon shot him, said Bran, glancing down at his fur covers. Quick to defend himself, Rob responded, it was a matter of timing, nothing more. If the boy didn't save you, Theon would have. Best you thank him, too, you understand? My lord, you have to see this, said Maester Luwin, sticking his head in the door as they both turned to face it when someone banged on the doorframe to draw the Starks' attention. Before stepping to the door, Rob looked at Bran inquisitively. He heard his brother ask, Rob, what's going on, but closed the door and followed Luwin. He said, is there something wrong, while speaking to the elder's back. Quite the opposite, my lord, it's a miracle. The elder turned to the Stark and explained incredulously, we tended to the boy for no more than a few minutes before something strange happened. The wounds were healing much faster than I have ever seen. It was as if the boy was regenerating himself, but Rob didn't understand what this meant until they reached the boy's bed. Rob scowled at the child who was laying face down on the bed with the arrow hole simply a bruise. He looked at the wound and was astounded to see that the flesh was not even close to the skin that had been damaged an hour earlier. In fact, the blood on his coat was more recent than the youngster's wounds. This boy was who? Rob replied, looking at the boy's back, Maester Luwin, the wildling woman we brought back with us said this boy doesn't even know his name. What do you make of that? Well, I'm not quite sure, either he has amnesia or he's hiding something, the old guy said, scratching his head. As the Stark Lord said, my thoughts exactly, he straightened up and proceeded to the door. When he wakes up, don't let him leave this room, he said. He didn't know his name, but this thing knew what it was, and the child couldn't believe what he was hearing. How could that have happened? This must have been some kind of dream. Why, therefore, could he think? Normally, you recall your words in dreams, but not your thoughts. So why are we able to think so clearly? The numbers didn't add up, but shouldn't he at least listen to what the enormous fox has to say, just in case this wasn't a dream and the creature was telling the truth? He has no idea who he is or where he came from, which is what motivated him to do what his heart says. After giving it some serious thought, the child turned back to the fox and focused on it. Fine, what do you know? After his host gave him his full attention once more, Kurama remained mute. It's likely that the boy was merely observing what he would say rather than taking him seriously, but in any case, he would have his name back. The fox winced. If this had happened only 2 years ago, he would have just sat here and laughed at his host's gullibility the whole time. However, things were changed, he was different. He then said, I will only give you your name and nothing more for now. Yeah, sure, name's enough for me, the boy said with his arms crossed. The boy's abrupt response caused Kurama's eyes to widen a little. This boy was nothing like Naruto, he didn't remember conflict, death, or hardship. The most dangerous thing of all was the apathy that replaced the lively boy from back home. Forget the scared little act he was putting on. If he wasn't even this concerned with finding his name, there was no hope in him returning home. He left everything behind to save an entire other world, for crying out loud. For what purpose? To turn into a helpless, pitiful, useless lump of human flesh, and it went too far. Forget about being gentle. You ungrateful son of a bitch. Kurama threw his head from his paws, rising as upright as he could. The kid flinched back a little at the reverberating sounds of the chains screeching across the floor, making Kurama scrunch his snout in disgust, rising high to the ceiling. The fox's muscles bulged and his limbs looked more defined in the dim light. The beast's head was an even deeper red with anger and his claws were scraping the floor in his building rage. With a vengeance, the Ninetales erupted. Not only do I know your name, but I know who you truly are. You are not the worthless piece of shit I see before me. You are not the person who allows a weak human to beat him to near death. You are not the person who sits by and watches a fight unfold. No, you are the one who despises pieces of shit, the one who never goes down without a fight, the one who fights for those who can't fight for themselves. You are Naruto Uzumaki, and you will get rid of that lifeless look in your eyes before I claw your fucking face off. Before being kicked back to consciousness by the powerful beast, the boy could only lower his jaw. Look, he's awake. Stay with him, I'll get Lord Stark here right away, Osha then observed as the youngster adapted to his new environment. He gazed out the window to his left, his bleak blue eyes narrowed in the light from the lanterns by the bed. She put a firm hand on his chest and said, "Easy, your wound is still fresh," as he attempted to get up. The child said, "No, I'm fine, really, I don't feel anything," as he took the hand away from him and sat up. He looked at the woman whose hand he had taken and gasped. "Why, you're the woman from the forest." "Yeah, so? You were going to kill me." "I'm about to finish the job if you don't lie back down," he was saying, and it was becoming old quickly. When the boy looked down at her, she accepted the challenge. When the door abruptly opened, two men entered. Based on her understanding, these were Robb Stark and Theon Greyjoy, the two people she and her now-deceased partners had encountered in the woods. Robb carried his deadweight all the way back to Winterfell after the boy was shot down and demanded that the arrow be torn from him, while Theon carried the smaller boy on his back. The Stark did something she would never forget when they looked at her one last time. She spared her life. She hurried back to the village after them. They were told to leave until they could properly care for him, and Osha had been given cleaning duty ever since. When they arrived, the village maester was called right away, and Robb ran to an open room in the castle. Blood was all over his clothes, but he only appeared worried about the boy's life. She was told to follow him, so she watched in panic as he laid the blonde on the covers and watched as the master wrapped his wound in cloth. She was moved to watch him while the doctor treated a patient who had a cold when the first news of the boy's miraculous recovery broke. She was surprised by the change in responsibilities, but she assumed it was because they didn't know she had nearly killed him. When they found out she had seen him before, they asked her what she knew, and she told them what he had told her, omitting the small detail that she had held a dagger to his throat while they were speaking. He had been quiet most of the time, but occasionally his expression changed. She was fascinated and amused by the strange lines on his face as they moved with his expressions, and she nearly felt sorry for the boy and his unidentified identity. Was he telling the truth when he claimed he didn't know his name? Or, before they discovered him, did he somehow lose his memory? Furthermore, from where had he come? She would have encountered him sooner if he had been a wildling, but his skin and clothing were too clean to be those of a wildling. He seemed to have been dumped into the jungle out of thin air. The boys exclaiming, "How on earth could he already have so much energy after just waking up from a half-day's rest?" interrupted her thoughts, and she completely forgot them when he woke up from his sleep. "How are you feeling?" said the youngster in a severe tone. When the youngster did, Osha glanced to Lord Stark. Hungry," the blonde said. Before Robb stammered, taken by surprise, "Oh, well, we're about to serve supper, but first I must thank you for saving my brother's life." The three of them exchanged odd glances with him. "I guess I should thank you for saving mine," the blonde said with a nod. "Actually, The doctor told me that your body healed itself. Care to explain how? The Stark said as he approached the bed. My lord, don't you think you ought to get some food in the boy first? I bet he hasn't eaten all day, Osha said, turning to Rob as she observed the boy's astonished expression. Rob glared at her, but he nodded curtly in agreement. Can you stand? He questioned, turning back to the boy. The young man nodded and got out of bed as if he had never been hurt. Osha could see his bandaged body when the covers were removed. She had never witnessed a person with such well-defined muscles. Each line was firm, and the room's low lighting simply highlighted each body feature. Perhaps the young man was a blacksmith? If he had soot in his blonde hair and beneath his fingernails, that would have made sense. Speaking about blonde hair, he might be a Lannister, right? According to the way people talk about them, Osha had heard of them before, the wealthiest family in Westeros, pompous pigs. The boy had the hair, albeit it was more messier and stood up in certain places. However, he lacked the emerald eyes. The wildling sneered, "This boy is giving me a headache just for wondering about him." Osha deduced from observing the expressions of the other two guys in the room that she wasn't the only one admiring his physique. A boy with a Spartan figure appears out of nowhere, right? It was complete and utter bullshit. Rob was the one who asked, "What's your name, boy?" while everyone else was thinking the same thing. Naruto Uzumaki, the boy said without missing a beat. As they exchanged glances, Osha noticed the distrustful expression in Rob's eyes, even though she knew that she was telling him the truth about what she had heard. She then questioned why the boy had suddenly learned his name, wondering if it was because he trusted the Stark Lord instead of her. Or did he want to hide his true identity, which he was aware of? It seemed strange. Was he being honest? Osha noticed something completely different in the boy's body language. He was standing erect in a powerful stance, and the vibe he was giving off was completely different from the one he gave off in the Wolfswood. His eyes were slightly narrowed, and his hands were both clenched. When she looked into them, she could only describe them as fiery. This boy was turning into a mystery. Food, an abundance of food. The boy smelled a variety of spices and could almost distinguish between the various smells in the meats. As he scanned the food, Uzumaki was absent-mindedly searching for something, but he didn't even know what he was looking for. He only knew that he didn't find what he wanted because he felt a slight disappointment in his stomach. Naruto could hardly contain his excitement when he saw the abundance of meats and pastries lined up on the tables. People were rushing around to place dishes on the wooden tables, and the scents wafted through the air were alluring. However, a touch on his shoulder stopped his thoughts. He turned to face the man who had earlier identified himself as Lord Robb Stark, and he smirked as the guy said, "If you stand there all day you won't get to eat anything." The atmosphere was warm, with people sitting and talking, and Naruto gave him a slight nod before hurrying to find a seat. He heard the young man behind him laugh as he hurriedly picked up a plate and took various items from the dishes and pots in front of him. Naruto found it comforting when he heard someone whisper behind him. A small child's voice asked, "That's the boy, right? The one that magically healed himself?" "Hush, lad, don't speak of such things, we don't know what he is," came back in a softer voice that sounded most like their father's. "We have no idea who he is." There were sounds of people rising from their seats and gasping as Naruto felt a deafening pain in his head, causing him to tense up to the point where he fell off his table bench. His shoulders struck the floor as he gripped his head tightly, and his mind was only able to concentrate on the tense pounding as all other sounds stopped in his head. What on earth is this? The boy's sole clear thought was, "It hurts." At that moment, pictures flashed before his closed eyelids. Children pointing fingers, a swing in a park, an educational institution, a monster, weeping. Was he in tears? His name was being called Naruto. 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 Rob was relieved that the boy had woken up, in part because his knee was beginning to feel numb from the stone floors, and in part because the dining hall had long since been cleared, with all the food and dishes removed except for Naruto's plate. The young man's cerulean eyes flickered to him, and Rob helped to relieve some of the worry from his face. Bran, who was sitting on the bench next to him and Naruto, let out a little sigh. Rob passed asleep in the hallway a while back, and after much begging, Bran was finally able to be taken to Naruto's side. What? What happened? The boy asked, looking as pale as a sheet. Rob exhaled. You fainted before you could even swallow a bite of food. Between the amount of blood you lost in not eating, it was only a matter of time. My apologies for not letting you eat sooner. Naruto gave him an incredulous look, but Rob allowed him to sit up. He then turned to face Bran, who offered him Naruto's plate. Rob said, "We saved your food, eat while I go get you something to wash it down with," after handing the youngster his dish. Without saying another thing, Rob stood up and left for the kitchens after Naruto took the dish. When Bran saw the young boy in front of him gobble up his food, he felt sorry for him because, in the words of the wildling who accompanied them, he appeared to have been abandoned in the forest. There was no way that he could have left the area beyond the wall without getting any dirt on his clothes or person. The fact that he resembled the boy he saw in his dream, however, was the one thing that annoyed him the most. There was no mistaking the lines on his face. He had never seen somebody with those markings before. He had the same eyes and hair, but his attire had changed. "You said your name was Naruto," he said, waiting until the child was nearly done before starting the conversation he had meant to start. "Yeah, Naruto Uzumaki, what's yours?" the blonde asked, nodding as he took his final bite and turned to face him. The blonde's name seemed quite strange. "Bran," the boy remarked, raising an eyebrow. "That woman you saw in the forest said you told her you didn't know what your name was," he added. Looking for any indication that the youngster wasn't who he claimed to be, the Stark boy observed the boy's face. The boy appeared to be as perplexed as he was. Bran's brows narrowed thoughtfully as Naruto reached behind his head and scratched it. "I know this is going to sound weird, but when I was knocked out after being shot, I had some kind of dream," the boy said. "I mean, it started out like a dream, but then it felt more than that. I saw a giant creature in a prison cell, and it told me that it knew my name." Bran's eyes grew wide. "Is he experiencing the same dreams as me? Does this monster resemble my crow with 3 eyes? I know you probably don't believe me, but something tells me that it was real," said the young man on the ground, turning his head away. "Naruto. Have you seen this creature before?" Bran then paused to explain, "Lately, I've been having the same dream, over and over again. In the dream, I keep seeing a 3-eyed crow. What I'm saying is, if you dream about this creature again, you might be like me." "Really?" the boy gasped as he glanced at him. Bran nodded as he observed the child struggling with his wits. "If you don't mind my asking, what did this creature look like?" Bran asked. The boy said, "It looked like a giant fox," without pausing. Bran's eyes widened once again, and he shouted, "How big?" out of pure curiosity. "Bigger than anything I've ever seen in my life," Naruto whispered as his eyes widened this time. "Sorry I couldn't get back sooner, there was a small commotion in the kitchen," Rob muttered, looking wearily at Naruto's empty plate as he arrived with a tarnished chalice just as Bran was about to speak. "Rob, can Naruto stay in the room next to mine?" Bran said, echoing his brother. Finally, Naruto was able to organize his thoughts as he lay under the insulating blankets. Did he indeed pass out from malnutrition and blood loss as a result of the incident in the dining hall? Or did he hear the chat next to him and it caused him to feel that way? And what were those pictures in his mind? Were they old memories? It seems as though the chat served as some kind of trigger for him to fall into shock. After considering it and everything Bran had discussed with him, he was gradually sent into a deep, dreamless slumber. When Robb went to retrieve Naruto from his quarters in the early morning, the sun's pinkish rays drove the shadowy reaches of the sky away, and the birds sang their morning song. Ever since he spared Bran from near death, he had wanted to test the boy's talents. His interest was heightened when he examined the boy's body. The youngster was already awake when he opened the door, leaning on the windowsill with his fur coverings wrapped around him. Robb handed the goods over, saying, "I figured you'd need these, you must have been freezing yesterday," as Naruto noticed him entering and looked at the clothes in his hands. Robb was holding a fur coat, a leather vest, and heavier leggings. Naruto exclaimed in amazement, "I can't take these." "Nonsense, you'll catch a cold if you go out without proper clothing, besides, these don't belong to anyone anymore," Robb said, refusing to take them back. In a technical sense, he was correct, they were his old clothes. The kid nodded and furrowed his brows, saying, "Thank you." He took the coat and gave Robb the sheets to replace on the bed. As he was doing so, the Stark Lord inquired, "How are you feeling?" "Pretty much normal, why?" the boy grunted in response to that. Robb stood up straight and placed his palm on his sword's hilt. "Would you like to train with me today?" he said. "I'm not sure how good I am with a sword, but I would like to," the child said, focusing on the weapon beneath Robb's hand. Robb found this perplexing because most kids his age ought to have wielded a sword at least once in their lives, yet most of them lacked arms that resembled those of a demigod. "Don't worry, I'm sure I can teach you." "Why? Why are you so kind to me?" the youngster questioned in a whisper, eyeing him blankly. "Naruto, you saved my little brother's life, what more reason do I need?" Robb asked without hesitation. Following Naruto's completion of donning his new clothes over his old ones, they left the chamber and headed down the stairs, down the hallway, and out into the courtyard. As they emerged into the open air, Robb saw Maester Luwin motionless in the center of the yard, holding a piece of parchment. Theon was motionless next to him. Something was amiss, and a cold ran through his bones. Naruto was by his side, observing his facial expression before turning to face the soldiers. After a little more walking, Robb yelled, "Theon? Maester Luwin? What's going on?" "We should go somewhere private," Theon said, glancing at him before the man turned slowly to face them, his face lowered. As Robb read the note that the elderly man gave him, Naruto, who was seated across from Theon, saw Robb's face shift from interest to outright wrath as he bit out, "Treason? Sansa wrote this?" The elderly gentleman responded immediately, "It's your sister's hand but the queen's words. You are summoned to King's Landing to swear fealty to the new king." Robb's disdain was almost palpable to Naruto. "Joffrey puts my father in chains, now he wants his ass kissed?" Naruto asked. "This is a royal command, my lord, if you should refuse to obey." "I won't refuse, if His Grace summons me to King's Landing, I'll go to King's Landing," he replied, squinting at the parchment. "But not alone," he added. "Call the banners," he said, passing the note to the old man. Naruto could only observe the scene in confusion as Theon grinned admiringly at Robb. Was there a war of some kind raging? "All of them, my lord," the man asked emphatically. Robb replied, "They've all sworn to defend my father, have they not?" "They have. Now we see what their words are worth," Robb said after pausing. The elder nodded and exhaled, "Yeah," before dismissing the trio to the hallway. With a quivering sigh, the Stark took a seat and turned to face Naruto, then Theon. "Are you afraid?" Robb's companion questioned after taking a whiff. Naruto glanced at Robb's hands across the table. Robb said, "I must be," as he noticed his shaking fingers. Good, Theon remarked in a persuaded tone before Naruto could respond. Why is that good? Rob asked, interrupting the blonde this time. After waiting, Rob and Naruto heard Theon say, "It means you're not stupid," once more. The Stark then remarked, "Naruto, I want you to come with us," after Rob shot him a severe glance in return. Rob, is this a good idea? Theon interrupted the blonde as he was ready to say something. When Rob said he has good battle sense, Naruto turned to face Theon. You just met the kid, so what? He stabs a man to save Bran and you think he'll be a hero? Theon sounded disdainful before complaining. Listen, Theon, we're going to King's Landing. Tywin Lannister has numbers far greater than our own. We'll need every able-bodied man here, Rob said, placing his hands on Theon's shoulders. How do we know he's not a spy? You know he looks like one of them. For all we know, he probably isn't even human, Theon said, shoving Rob's hands off him before standing up and turning to face Naruto. He still didn't seem to be convinced that this plan was in their best interests. Naruto gritted his teeth as Rob leaped from his chair, but Theon had already started to move toward the hall's entrance. The child glared at the table, his hair falling in front of his eyes. That's the boy, right? The one that magically healed himself? Hush, lad, don't speak of such things. We don't know what he is. For all we know, he probably isn't even human. Unexpectedly, Naruto came up to Theon, took hold of his shoulder, and gave him a direct slap across the cheek. Theon was thrown to the ground by the impact, and he turned to face Naruto with wide eyes. Rob's name was barely audible behind him. I'm not a spy, but I am a human being, you better believe it, Naruto growled as he stood over the disheveled guy, his ferocious blue eyes staring into Theon's brain. Abruptly, he became aware of something. Naruto looked at his crimson knuckles as Rob hurried to his comrade on the ground. Not only do I know your name, but I know who you truly are. You are not the worthless piece of shit I see before me. The blonde's mouth fell open a little. You are the one who despises pieces of shit. Naruto, have you gone mad? Rob turned to the youngster, who was staring at nothing. You are Naruto Uzumaki. Naruto was unable to speak to Rob and his deceased comrade because his throat was blocked and his eyes were wide. The young man fled the room in a panic, backing up a few steps at a time. The doors banged shut after flying open.